The last thing Elena Vasquez radioed before vanishing was, "I can see them through the scope, but they're not supposed to be here. They're not supposed to exist yet." 5 years later, when her sniper scope surfaced in an underground bunker that had been sealed since 1962, investigators made a chilling discovery. Fresh coordinates had been carved into the metal in Elena's own handwriting, but the date scratched beside them was from next year. Welcome to Hidden Legends. Before we begin this powerful story of courage, skill, and forgotten heroism, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. October 14, 2017. Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Eastern Syria. The desert air hung thick with tension as Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez settled into her overwatch position on the compound's highest tower. At 29, she had become one of the Marines' most trusted marksmen, her steady hands and sharp eyes having saved countless lives across 3 deployments in the volatile region. Elena adjusted her M40A6 sniper rifle against the sandbags, peering through the high-powered scope into the pre-dawn darkness. The familiar weight of the weapon brought comfort, but tonight something felt different. For 7 consecutive nights, she had reported movement in sectors that command insisted were empty. Eagle eye to Overwatch, Elena spoke into her radio, voice calm despite the unease creeping through her chest. Beginning sweep of sectors Alpha through Delta. No movement detected. Wait. She paused, adjusting her scope's focus. Through the crosshairs, approximately 800 meters northeast, she caught sight of figures moving with military precision across terrain that should have been impossible to traverse undetected. Overwatch, I have eyes on multiple contacts in grid square 4-7 Alpha. Count 12 individuals, moving in formation. The response crackled back immediately. Eagle eye negative. Satellite shows all clear in that sector. Check your equipment. Elena frowned, steadying her scope against her shoulder. The figures were still there, soldiers wearing uniforms she didn't recognize, carrying weapons with shapes that seemed wrong somehow. Too angular, too streamlined, like nothing she'd seen in any military manual. Overwatch, I'm telling you there are hostiles out there. 12 confirmed, advancing on our position using cover techniques I've never encountered. A different voice came through the radio, Captain Marcus Webb, her commanding officer. Elena, what exactly are you seeing? Elena tracked one figure through her scope, noting the way his uniform seemed to shift color with the terrain beneath him. Sir, I'm observing soldiers with advanced camouflage technology. Their equipment appears to be... She hesitated, knowing how the next words would sound. Sir, their gear doesn't match anything in our current intelligence files. There was a long pause before Captain Webb responded. Elena, maintain observation. Do not engage unless directly threatened. I'm sending Martinez to verify. 20 minutes later, Corporal David Martinez climbed into the sniper's nest, carrying his own high-powered optics. Elena directed him toward the area where she'd been tracking movement, but Martinez scanned for several minutes before lowering his binoculars with a puzzled expression. Elena, I'm not picking up anything out there. You sure you're not seeing heat distortion? It's been a long shift. Elena looked through her scope again. The figures had moved closer, perhaps 600 meters now. One of them appeared to be studying her position through his own optics, and she could swear he was looking directly at her. They're right there, David. Grid 4-7 Alpha, bearing 045 degrees northeast. How are you not seeing them? Martinez raised his binoculars again, methodically scanning the coordinates Elena had provided. Elena, there's nothing there except rocks and desert scrub. When's the last time you had water? But Elena wasn't listening. Through her scope, she watched as the lead figure raised what looked like a communication device to his mouth. Then, impossibly, a voice began speaking directly into her ear, not through the radio but somehow transmitted through her scope itself. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, the voice said, speaking clear, unaccented English. You can see us because you're supposed to see us. But you're observing the wrong timeline. Elena's hands tightened on her rifle. She keyed her radio with trembling fingers. Overwatch, I'm receiving unauthorized communications through my optical equipment. Someone is transmitting directly to my position. Captain Webb's voice came back sharp with concern. Elena, that's not possible. Scopes don't receive transmissions. I'm ordering you to stand down and report to medical for evaluation. Sir, I need you to understand. Elena, The voice in her scope interrupted, clearer now, almost conversational. The coordinates you need are 34.5783 degrees north, 40.9847 degrees east. Tell them what you see at those coordinates. Elena hesitated, then keyed her radio. Overwatch, I need immediate satellite verification of coordinates 34.5783 north, 40.9847 east. After a moment, the response came back from the operations center. Elena, those coordinates place you in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. They're not in our area of operations. Elena adjusted her scope to the exact coordinates the voice had provided. What she saw through the crosshairs made her question everything she thought she understood about warfare, geography, and the nature of time itself. The coordinates didn't show ocean. They showed a sprawling military installation that had never been built. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she stared through her scope at coordinates that should have shown nothing but Mediterranean waters. Instead, she was looking at a massive military complex. Concrete bunkers, communications arrays, and vehicle depots spread across what appeared to be reclaimed desert land. This is impossible, she whispered, adjusting her scope's focus to sharpen the image. The facility looked modern with architectural elements she didn't recognize. Solar panel arrays covered entire buildings, and the vehicles moving between structures had a sleek, futuristic design that seemed decades ahead of current military technology. Elena, Captain Webb's voice crackled through her radio. Report your status. Did you verify those coordinates? Elena keyed her mic, unsure how to explain what she was seeing. Sir, the coordinates show a military installation. Large-scale, highly advanced. But according to our maps, this should be open ocean. Elena, you're looking at a map reference that places you 200 miles west of Cyprus. There's no land mass there, let alone a military base. I'm ordering you to cease observation and report to medical immediately. But Elena couldn't tear herself away from the scope. Through the crosshairs, she watched personnel moving around the facility with purpose. Their uniforms bore insignia she didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to incorporate elements from various nations' military branches, but combined in ways that suggested a unified command structure that didn't exist. Look closer, the mysterious voice spoke directly into her ear again. What year do you think it is, Elena? Elena's hands trembled as she tracked a flag flying over the central command building. The design incorporated familiar elements, stars and stripes, but arranged in a pattern she'd never seen. The flag had more stars, arranged differently, and the stripes appeared to include colors beyond the traditional red, white, and blue. Who are you? Elena whispered, hoping the voice would hear her without her having to key the radio. We're the 47th Temporal Reconnaissance Unit deployed from Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Just not the Phoenix you know. Elena, what's today's date? October 14, 2017. In your timeline, yes. In ours, it's October 14, 2029. You're seeing 12 years into a future that may or may not come to pass, depending on decisions that haven't been made yet. Elena's rational mind rejected what she was hearing, but the evidence was right there in her crosshairs. The soldiers she'd been tracking were moving with technologies and tactics that seemed impossibly advanced. Their equipment incorporated materials that appeared to bend light around them, and their weapons fired with no visible muzzle flash or sound signature. Why can I see you? Elena asked quietly. Because something went wrong with our temporal reconnaissance mission. We're supposed to be observing your timeline without being detected, but there's been a malfunction in our temporal shielding. You're the only person in 2017 who can see us because your position, your equipment, and your specific neurological patterns have created an accidental bridge between timelines. Elena looked through her scope at the impossible military base again. Personnel were now gathering in formation, as if preparing for some kind of briefing or mission departure. In the distance, she could see aircraft unlike anything in current service, sleek, almost organic-looking vehicles that seemed to hover without visible propulsion systems. Elena. Captain Webb's voice cut through her concentration. I'm sending a team to your position. You will stand down immediately and surrender your weapon for inspection. Elena knew she had perhaps minutes before her position would be overrun by concerned command staff. She keyed her radio one last time. Sir, I need you to document this transmission. Whatever's happening here, it needs to be recorded. I'm seeing military technology that's decades ahead of anything we have. Elena, there's nothing there. You're experiencing a medical episode and we're going to get you help. The voice in her scope spoke again, more urgently now. Elena, they can't see or hear us because they're not supposed to. But you are. There's something you need to know about why this is happening, and why your specific timeline is important to us. Elena could hear boots on the metal stairs leading up to her position. Martinez was returning with additional personnel. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they would take her weapon and end whatever was happening. Tell me quickly, she whispered. The base you're stationed at, Phoenix, it's going to be attacked in 3 days. October 17, 2017, at 0347 hours. Coordinated assault, multiple vectors. In our timeline, it was the event that started a larger conflict. 87 American personnel died, including... The voice paused. Including you. Elena's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Elena, in our timeline you died defending this position on October 17th. But your death was the catalyst for a technological breakthrough that led to the development of temporal reconnaissance. We've been sent back to prevent that attack, but our presence here has created a paradox. If we prevent your death, the technology that allowed us to come back and save you will never be developed. The footsteps were closer now. Elena could hear Captain Webb's voice directing the approaching team. She had seconds to make a decision that would affect not just her life, but apparently the course of history itself. What do you need me to do? She whispered. There's a bunker, Elena. Coordinates 34.5783 north, 40.9847 east, but in your timeline, not ours. It's underground, hidden beneath what looks like empty desert. Inside that bunker, you'll find equipment that can help you survive what's coming. But Elena. What? If you go there, you'll be stepping outside your own timeline. You might save yourself and prevent the war, but you'll never be able to return to the life you know. The metal door to the roof access burst open. Captain Webb appeared, followed by Martinez and 2 other Marines, all looking at Elena with a mixture of concern and caution. Elena, Captain Webb called out, his voice gentle but firm. Step away from the weapon. We're going to take care of you. Elena looked through her scope one last time. The future soldiers were watching her now, and she could see the concern in their posture even across timelines. One of them, the one who had been speaking to her, raised his hand in what might have been a salute or a farewell. Elena made her choice. Elena slowly stepped back from her rifle, hands raised to show she wasn't a threat. Captain Webb approached cautiously, his expression mixing relief with deep concern. Behind him, Martinez and the other Marines maintained their positions, ready to intervene if necessary. Elena, Captain Webb said gently, I need you to tell me what's been happening up here. You've been reporting contacts that don't exist and claiming to receive transmissions through equipment that can't receive them. Elena met his eyes, knowing that anything she said would sound like the ravings of someone suffering from combat stress or heat exhaustion. But the voice in her scope had been specific: coordinates, a date, a time. Information that could be verified. Sir, I need you to listen to me very carefully. On October 17th at 0347 hours, this base is going to be attacked. Coordinated assault, multiple vectors. I don't know how I know this, but I need you to verify those coordinates I gave you. 34.5783 north, 40.9847 east. Captain Webb studied her face, looking for signs of deception or delusion. Elena, those coordinates place you in the Mediterranean Sea. There's nothing there. Sir, with respect, I need you to check again. Not for surface features but for underground installations. Old bunkers, abandoned facilities, anything that might have been forgotten or misclassified. Martinez spoke up. Captain, maybe we should humor her. If Elena's intel is correct about an attack. Elena's been hallucinating contacts and receiving phantom transmissions, Captain Webb interrupted. She needs medical attention, not tactical support. But something in Elena's expression must have given him pause, because after a moment he sighed and keyed his radio. Operations, this is Webb. I need a comprehensive database search on coordinates 34.5783 north, 40.9847 east. Check historical records, abandoned facilities, anything that might show up in classified archives. While they waited for the response, Elena found herself staring at her rifle scope, wondering if the future soldiers were still watching. The voice had said she could step outside her timeline, but at what cost? Would she simply disappear from 2017, leaving her unit to face the predicted attack without warning? Captain Webb, the radio crackled to life. Your coordinates show an interesting historical marker. There's a decommissioned bunker complex from the 1960s, built during early NATO expansion. It was sealed and classified as abandoned in 1962, but the records show it was designed as a communication hub for Mediterranean operations. Elena felt a chill of vindication mixed with terror. The coordinates were real. Captain Webb looked at her with new interest. Elena, how did you know about a classified bunker that's been sealed for over 50 years? Elena shook her head. Sir, I can't explain that. But I can tell you that if I'm right about the bunker, then I might also be right about the attack. Can you afford to take that chance? Captain Webb was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke into his radio. Operations, I need a reconnaissance team prepared for investigation of those coordinates. Full excavation equipment and archaeological protocols. And I want base defenses reviewed for potential vulnerabilities, effective immediately. Elena felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The voice had warned her that changing the timeline might prevent the technology that made their intervention possible. If she succeeded in preventing the attack, would she create a paradox that unraveled everything? Elena, Captain Webb continued, you're going to lead that reconnaissance team to the bunker. If there's something there that explains how you knew about it, I want to understand what we're dealing with. Elena nodded, but as she looked at her rifle scope one last time, she noticed something that made her blood freeze. Scratched into the metal housing of the scope, in handwriting she recognized as her own, were the coordinates 34.5783N, 40.9847E. And beside them, carved in the same hand, was a date, October 16, 2023. 6 years in the future. Elena realized that she hadn't just received information from the future soldiers, she had somehow already been to that bunker, in a timeline that hadn't happened yet. The scratches in the metal were proof that she would survive the coming attack, travel to those coordinates, and somehow mark her own equipment with information from a future she couldn't remember. As Captain Webb organized the reconnaissance mission, Elena touched the scratches in her scope housing with trembling fingers. The metal was warm to the touch, as if the carving had been done moments ago. She was about to step into a mystery that stretched across decades, involving bunkers that shouldn't exist, technology from the future, and a war that might or might not happen, depending on choices she hadn't made yet. But first she had to survive the next 3 days. October 15, 2017. The reconnaissance team departed Forward Operating Base Phoenix at 0600 hours, traveling in 2 armored vehicles toward coordinates that officially didn't exist. Elena sat in the lead vehicle, her rifle secured beside her, the mysterious scratches in the scope housing hidden beneath protective covers. Captain Webb had assigned her to lead the team to the bunker, but Elena could see the doubt in his eyes. Corporal Martinez sat across from her, along with Specialist Sarah Kim, a communications expert, and Sergeant Frank Morrison, whose background in explosive ordnance disposal would be essential if they encountered booby traps in the abandoned facility. The journey across the Syrian desert took 4 hours, following routes that avoided known hostile territories. As they approached the coordinates, Elena felt an odd sense of familiarity, as if she had made this trip before, though she was certain she had never been to this location. Approaching target coordinates, the driver reported. No visible surface structures. Looks like empty desert. Elena stepped out of the vehicle, immediately scanning the terrain. To most eyes, the area would appear unremarkable, rocky desert punctuated by sparse vegetation and scattered stones. But as she moved across the landscape, her trained sniper's eye caught details that others might miss. There, she pointed toward a slight depression in the ground, perhaps 30 meters from their vehicles. The rocks aren't natural. They've been arranged to cover something. Sergeant Morrison approached with ground-penetrating radar equipment, sweeping the area Elena had indicated. After several minutes of careful scanning, he looked up with surprise. She's right. There's a concrete structure about 8 feet down, extending in multiple directions. This is a substantial installation. Captain Webb keyed his radio to report their findings to base, while Morrison's team began the delicate process of excavation. Using small charges and hand tools, they carefully removed the camouflaged covering that had hidden the bunker entrance for over 50 years. As the concrete structure emerged from beneath decades of accumulated sand and debris, Elena noticed something that made her stomach tighten with unease. Along the edge of what appeared to be an access hatch, someone had carved coordinates and a date in the concrete. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, but the date was October 16, 2023, the same future date she had found scratched into her rifle scope. "Captain," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to see this." Captain Webb approached and examined the carved markings. "Elena, is this your handwriting?" Elena nodded, though she had no memory of ever carving anything into this concrete. "Yes, sir. But I've never been here before." Captain Webb studied her face carefully. "Elena, we're going to enter this bunker together, and I want you to tell me immediately if anything looks familiar to you. Something very strange is happening here, and I need to understand what we're dealing with." Morrison succeeded in opening the hatch, revealing a metal ladder descending into darkness. The air that rose from the opening was stale but breathable, carrying a faint electronic humming that suggested the presence of powered equipment below. "Sir," Specialist Kim reported, "I'm detecting active electrical signatures from inside. This facility isn't as abandoned as the records indicate." Elena was the first to descend the ladder, her sidearm drawn and a tactical flashlight illuminating the concrete corridor below. The bunker was larger than expected, with multiple branching passages leading away from the central access point. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they moved deeper into the facility, activated by motion sensors that shouldn't have been functional after 60 years of abandonment. The first chamber they entered contained 1960s-era communication equipment, much of it still operational despite decades of neglect. But scattered among the vintage electronics were devices that Elena didn't recognize, sleek, modern-looking instruments that seemed to incorporate technology decades ahead of anything she'd encountered. "Captain," Morrison called from a side corridor, "you need to see this." They followed him to a smaller room that had been converted into what appeared to be a personal workspace. Maps covered the walls, showing military installations across the Middle East. Some of the marked locations Elena recognized as current bases, but others showed facilities that hadn't been built yet, or had been planned but never constructed. On a desk in the center of the room sat Elena's rifle scope. Not a similar scope, but the exact scope she had been using 3 days ago, complete with the same scratches and wear patterns she remembered. Beside it lay a journal written in her own handwriting, documenting events that hadn't happened yet. Elena approached the desk with trembling hands. The journal was open to an entry dated October 17, 2017, 2 days in the future. The entry read, "The attack came exactly as they warned. 0347 hours, multiple vectors just as the voice in the scope predicted. 87 casualties including Martinez and Kim. I survived only because I was already here in the bunker trying to understand what was happening to me. But surviving means I can never go back. The timeline has changed and I'm outside it now." Elena looked at her teammates, Martinez and Kim, who according to the journal would die in an attack that was still 2 days away. Captain Webb was reading over her shoulder, his expression growing more troubled with each line. "Elena," he said quietly, "this journal contains detailed intelligence about future military operations. How is that possible?" Elena flipped through pages of her own handwriting, documenting months and years of events she had never experienced. According to the journal, after surviving the attack on Forward Operating Base Phoenix, she had lived in this bunker, using the advanced equipment to monitor multiple timelines and prevent catastrophic events across different versions of history. The final entry, dated October 16, 2023, was different from the others. "I've been here for 6 years now, watching timelines diverge and converge, preventing wars and disasters across multiple realities. But I've learned something terrible. Every change I make creates new problems elsewhere. For every attack I prevent, another happens somewhere else. For every life I save, another is lost in a different timeline. The future soldiers were right. Stepping outside my own timeline saved my life, but it trapped me in a prison of infinite responsibility. Today I'm going to try something different. I'm going to send my scope back to my 2017 self, with coordinates carved into the metal. Maybe if she finds this place before the attack instead of after, we can break the cycle." Elena looked at the scope on the desk, then at the scope attached to her rifle. They were identical. Captain Webb was staring at her with an expression of fear and fascination. "Elena, if this journal is accurate, you've been living in this bunker for 6 years in a timeline where the rest of us are dead. How is that possible? Elena picked up the journal and continued reading. According to her future self, the bunker contained technology that the 1960s military had never understood, equipment that had been recovered from crash sites and reverse-engineered without comprehension of its true capabilities. The temporal reconnaissance unit she had communicated with wasn't from Earth's future, but from a parallel timeline where humanity had developed different technology. The humming sound they had been hearing wasn't electrical equipment. It was the bunker itself, existing in multiple timelines simultaneously, anchored to this location but accessible from different points in history. Elena was beginning to understand that finding this bunker hadn't been the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far more complex and dangerous than any of them could have imagined. Elena continued reading the journal, each page revealing more disturbing details about the timeline prison she would apparently inhabit for the next 6 years. According to her future self, the bunker existed as a temporal nexus, a fixed point that remained constant across multiple parallel timelines, allowing observation and limited intervention in historical events. Listen to this, Elena said, reading aloud from an entry dated March 3, 2019. Today I prevented a terrorist attack in London by transmitting intelligence to authorities 2 days before the event. 17 lives saved. But checking parallel timelines revealed that the prevented attack caused the terrorists to target a school in Madrid instead. 23 children died. Every intervention creates new problems. I'm not preventing tragedies, I'm just moving them around. Captain Webb was studying the advanced equipment scattered throughout the bunker. Elena, some of this technology is unlike anything I've seen. This isn't just communication equipment. These devices appear to be monitoring multiple realities simultaneously. Specialist Kim had connected her equipment to one of the unknown devices and was analyzing the data streams. Captain, this machine is receiving transmissions from what appear to be hundreds of different sources, all broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The information flow is enormous: battlefield reports, intelligence summaries, casualty figures, all from events that happened at different times and places. Elena found a technical manual written in her own handwriting, documenting her gradual understanding of the bunker's capabilities. According to the manual, the facility had been built around technology recovered from what the 1960s military had classified as anomalous aerial phenomena. The technology allowed observation across temporal boundaries, but using it came with a terrible cost. Read this section, Elena said, pointing to a passage that made her hands shake. The technology requires a consciousness anchor, someone who exists outside normal temporal flow to operate the monitoring systems. Once someone becomes the anchor, they can't return to their original timeline without causing what the manual calls cascade failures across multiple realities. The operator becomes responsible for maintaining temporal stability, essentially trapped in the nexus point forever. Martinez had been exploring the deeper sections of the bunker and returned with disturbing news. There are living quarters down there, set up for long-term habitation. Looks like someone has been living here recently. The food stores are well maintained, and there's evidence of ongoing occupation. Elena felt a chill of recognition. According to the journal, her future self had been preparing for this moment, the arrival of her 2017 self at the bunker. The temporal loop was closing, but Elena was beginning to understand that she had a choice that her future self hadn't mentioned in the journal. She could refuse to stay. Captain, Elena said, I think I understand what's happening. My future self is trapped here because she prevented the attack on Forward Operating Base Phoenix by staying in the bunker instead of returning to base. But what if we could prevent the attack without me having to stay here? Captain Webb considered this. What are you proposing? Elena looked at the monitoring equipment, which was displaying real-time intelligence about the planned attack on their base. According to this data, the attack is being coordinated from 3 different locations. If we could transmit the coordinates of these staging areas to base, they could be neutralized without me having to remain outside my timeline. Specialist Kim examined the transmission equipment. I can establish a secure link back to base, but Elena, according to your journal, every intervention creates unintended consequences. What if preventing this attack causes something worse? Elena flipped through the journal to the final entries, looking for clues about her future self's ultimate plan. In an entry dated just days before the coordinates had been carved into her scope, she found her answer. I've spent 6 years trying to prevent disasters and only succeeded in moving suffering from one timeline to another. But I've discovered something important. The temporal nexus doesn't require a permanent operator. It requires someone willing to make the hard choice to let events unfold naturally, only intervening when the consequences would affect multiple timelines simultaneously. I'm going to send my 2017 self the coordinates, but not to trap her here like I was trapped. I'm going to give her the choice I never had, to walk away and let the natural timeline proceed, accepting that some tragedies can't be prevented without causing greater harm. Elena closed the journal and looked at her teammates. My future self wants me to have a choice she never had. We can prevent the attack on our base, but doing so might cause something worse elsewhere. Or we can return to base, warn them about the attack through normal channels, and let history unfold as it was meant to. Captain Webb was quiet for a long moment. Elena, if we don't use this technology to prevent the attack, people are going to die. People we know. And if we do use it, people we'll never know might die instead. According to the journal, the technology doesn't prevent suffering, it just redistributes it. Martinez spoke up. Elena, what does your gut tell you? You're the one who's been in contact with the future timeline. What do you think we should do? Elena looked around the bunker at technology that could theoretically prevent countless tragedies, but at the cost of making her responsible for tragedies that would happen elsewhere as a result. She thought about the voice in her scope, the soldiers from the future who had warned her about the attack. I think, Elena said slowly, that the future soldiers didn't contact me to save my life. They contacted me to give me information I could use to save lives without breaking the timeline. We're going to return to base, report the intelligence through normal channels, and trust our people to handle the threat. Elena walked to the desk and picked up the rifle scope that had belonged to her future self. As she held it, she could feel the weight of 6 years of isolation and impossible choices. She understood now why her future self had carved the coordinates into the metal, not to trap her past self in the bunker, but to show her what would happen if she tried to control events beyond her understanding. Captain Webb nodded approvingly. Elena, I think you're making the right choice. But what about this bunker? What about the technology? Elena looked at the monitoring equipment one last time, watching data streams from timelines where different choices had been made. We reported to command and let them decide. But we make sure they understand the cost of using it. As the team prepared to leave the bunker, Elena placed her own rifle scope on the desk beside the one her future self had left behind. She carved today's date into the concrete wall, not as a message to the future, but as a reminder that some choices were too important to leave to chance. Elena Vasquez was going to return to Forward Operating Base Phoenix, warn them about the coming attack through proper channels, and trust that the future would unfold as it was meant to. But as they climbed the ladder back to the surface, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her story with the bunker wasn't over. It was just beginning in a different way. October 16, 2017. Elena Vasquez stood in the command briefing room at Forward Operating Base Phoenix, surrounded by maps, intelligence reports, and officers who were struggling to process the information she had brought back from the bunker. Captain Webb had spent the previous evening compiling their findings into a report that read like science fiction, but the supporting evidence was undeniable. The intelligence you've provided, Colonel Sarah Martinez said, reviewing the tactical analysis Elena had extracted from the bunker's monitoring systems, indicates coordinated assault teams at 3 staging locations. Our satellite imagery confirms unusual activity at these coordinates. How exactly did you acquire this information? Elena exchanged glances with Captain Webb. They had agreed to present the essential intelligence while keeping the more disturbing aspects of the temporal technology classified until higher authorities could evaluate the implications. Ma'am, we discovered an abandoned bunker containing communication equipment that had been monitoring insurgent activities. The intelligence appears to be accurate, but we recommend immediate verification through standard channels. Colonel Martinez studied the tactical maps Elena had provided. These staging areas are perfectly positioned for a coordinated attack on our base. If your intelligence is correct, they could breach our perimeter simultaneously from 3 directions. When do you assess the attack will occur? Elena felt the weight of knowledge she couldn't fully explain. Ma'am, based on the communication intercepts, the attack is planned for tomorrow morning at 0347 hours. The briefing room erupted in activity as officers began coordinating response plans. Strike teams were deployed to neutralize the staging areas, base defenses were reinforced, and additional air support was requested. Elena watched the preparations with a mixture of relief and apprehension, wondering if they were preventing a tragedy or simply reshaping it. But as the day progressed, something unexpected happened. The intelligence Elena had provided was too detailed, too accurate for insurgent forces to have developed independently. Military analysts began asking questions about the source of the information, and the answers led them back to the bunker. By evening, Elena found herself facing a classified briefing with officers she didn't recognize, wearing uniforms with insignia from agencies she couldn't identify. The lead investigator, a woman who introduced herself only as Agent Morrison, seemed to know more about the bunker than Elena had reported. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, Agent Morrison began, "Our preliminary analysis of the bunker you discovered indicates the presence of technology that doesn't match any known military or civilian systems. We need you to provide a complete report of everything you observed in that facility." Elena felt trapped between her duty to report what she had seen and her growing understanding that the technology in the bunker was too dangerous to be used casually. "Ma'am, I observed communication equipment of unknown origin that appeared to monitor multiple information sources simultaneously. The tactical intelligence we extracted was accurate, but I believe using the equipment extensively could have unintended consequences." Agent Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of consequences?" Elena thought about the journal written in her own handwriting, documenting 6 years of isolation and failed attempts to prevent suffering across multiple timelines. "Ma'am, based on operational notes found in the bunker, the technology appears to create dependency in its operators. Extended use may result in psychological effects that impair judgment." It wasn't the complete truth, but it was accurate enough to convey the danger without revealing details that might encourage rather than discourage use of the temporal monitoring systems. Agent Morrison made notes, then looked up with an expression that suggested she knew Elena was withholding information. "Staff Sergeant, you'll be temporarily assigned to a special research unit for further debriefing. We need to understand the full capabilities of the technology you discovered." Elena's heart sank. The future she had hoped to avoid, isolation from her unit, assignment to classified projects she couldn't discuss, was happening anyway, just through different circumstances. But as Agent Morrison continued the briefing, alarms began sounding throughout the base. Elena checked her watch. 0347 hours. Despite all their preparations, despite the intelligence she had provided, the attack was beginning exactly as predicted. "All personnel to defensive positions." Colonel Martinez's voice boomed over the intercom. "We are under coordinated assault from multiple vectors." Elena felt a chill of recognition. This was the moment described in her future self's journal, the attack that would change everything. But this time she wasn't trapped in the bunker, watching helplessly as her timeline collapsed. She was here with her unit ready to fight. Agent Morrison grabbed Elena's arm as explosions began to rock the base perimeter. "Staff Sergeant, we need to get you to a secure location. Your knowledge of that bunker technology is too valuable to risk." "No," Elena said firmly, pulling away. "My place is with my unit. They need me." She ran from the briefing room toward her sniper position, Agent Morrison shouting behind her. As Elena climbed the stairs to the tower where this had all begun 3 days ago, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the desert darkness. The attack was coming from exactly the direction she had predicted, but something was different. The base was ready. Strike teams had already neutralized 2 of the 3 staging areas based on her intelligence. Air support was inbound. The 3rd assault team was advancing on their position, but they were walking into a prepared defense instead of catching a sleeping base by surprise. Elena reached her sniper position and grabbed her rifle, the scope still bearing the scratches from a future that might never come to pass. Through the crosshairs she could see the attacking forces, no longer mysterious soldiers from another timeline, but real insurgents using conventional tactics. "Eagle eye to Overwatch," she radioed, her voice steady. "I have eyes on the remaining assault team. 12 hostiles advancing on the north perimeter. Permission to engage. Eagle eye, you are cleared to engage. Protect the base." Elena steadied her breathing, feeling the familiar calm that came with her rifle in her hands and a clear mission ahead. These weren't phantom soldiers from the future, they were real enemies threatening real people she cared about. She took her first shot. The battle lasted 3 hours. By dawn, the coordinated assault had been completely repelled, with minimal casualties on the American side. Elena's accurate intelligence and precise shooting had been instrumental in the victory, but as she climbed down from her sniper position, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. Captain Webb was waiting for her at the base of the tower, his expression a mixture of pride and confusion. "Elena, your intelligence saved lives tonight. But I need to understand, how did you know exactly where they would attack and when?" Elena looked at her rifle scope, running her finger over the scratches that had seemed so mysterious just days ago. "Sir, I think I'm beginning to understand something about cause and effect. The attack happened exactly as predicted, but because we were prepared, the outcome was different." Agent Morrison appeared, flanked by two other investigators. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, we need to discuss the implications of what happened here. Your predictions were too accurate to be coincidental." Elena nodded, but her attention was drawn to movement in the distance. A convoy of unmarked vehicles was approaching the base, and she recognized the lead vehicle from her visions in the bunker. It was the same type she had seen in the impossible military installation. As the convoy drew closer, Elena felt the familiar sensation of temporal displacement she had experienced when communicating with the future soldiers. But this time it wasn't coming through her scope. It was emanating from the approaching vehicles. The lead vehicle stopped near the command building, and figures emerged wearing uniforms Elena recognized from her visions. But these weren't soldiers from 2029. They were wearing 2017 insignia with subtle differences that suggested they came from a slightly different timeline. The commanding officer approached Elena directly, as if he had been expecting to find her. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I'm Colonel James Harrison from Temporal Research Division. We need to debrief you about your recent experiences." Elena stared at him. "Temporal Research Division doesn't exist." Colonel Harrison smiled. "In your timeline it doesn't. But temporal paradoxes have a way of creating new realities. Your discovery of the bunker and your choice not to use its technology to prevent the attack has created a stable timeline where certain research programs were accelerated." Elena felt the weight of understanding settling over her. "You're saying that by choosing not to change the timeline I actually did change it?" "Not changed," Colonel Harrison corrected. "Stabilized. Your future self spent 6 years trapped in a paradox loop, trying to prevent disasters and only creating new ones. But you broke that loop by making the hardest choice of all, accepting that some events have to happen naturally." Agent Morrison stepped forward. "Colonel, I wasn't aware that your division had jurisdiction here." Colonel Harrison turned to her with an expression that suggested he came with authority that superseded normal military hierarchy. "Agent Morrison, the discovery of temporal technology requires specialized oversight. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has demonstrated both access to temporal phenomena and the wisdom to use that access responsibly." Elena looked around at her teammates, Martinez, Kim, Captain Webb, all alive and unharmed despite the journal's prediction of their deaths. "What happened to the timeline where they died?" "It was never stable," Colonel Harrison explained. "Your future self's attempts to maintain it through constant intervention were creating cascade failures across multiple realities. By choosing to warn the base through normal channels rather than using temporal technology, you allowed events to unfold naturally while still preventing unnecessary casualties." Elena thought about the bunker, about the scope left behind by her future self, about the journal documenting 6 years of isolation and impossible choices. "What happens to the bunker now?" Colonel Harrison's expression grew serious. "That depends on you, Staff Sergeant. We're offering you a position with Temporal Research Division. Not as a prisoner of the technology but as a guardian of it. Someone who understands both its power and its dangers." Elena looked at her rifle scope one last time, then at her teammates who were alive because she had made the right choice. "What would my duties involve?" "Monitoring temporal anomalies, investigating paradox events, and most importantly, ensuring that timeline technology is never used casually. Your experience makes you uniquely qualified to understand why some tragedies can't be prevented without causing greater harm." Elena thought about the voice in her scope, the future soldiers who had tried to save her life and ended up trapping her in an endless cycle of intervention. She thought about her future self's final message, about the choice to walk away from infinite power over events beyond her understanding. "I accept," Elena said. "But I have conditions." Colonel Harrison nodded. "Name them." "My team comes with me. Martinez, Kim, Morrison, Captain Webb. If we're going to guard against the misuse of temporal technology, We need people who understand both its capabilities and its costs. Agreed. Elena looked around at her teammates, seeing acceptance and determination in their faces. They had all witnessed something that challenged their understanding of reality, and they had all chosen to face it together. As Colonel Harrison's team began coordinating the transfer of personnel and the securing of the bunker, Elena felt a strange sense of completion. The mysterious scratches on her rifle scope were no longer mysteries, they were reminders of a future that had been prevented by the wisdom to leave it unchanged. But as she packed her equipment for transfer to Temporal Research Division, Elena discovered one final surprise. In her gear bag, wrapped in cloth she didn't remember placing there, was a second journal. This one was written in her own handwriting, but documented events she had never experienced. Events from the timeline where she had chosen to use the bunker's technology. The final entry, dated just hours ago, read, "Today I learned that the hardest choice isn't deciding whether to change the past or future. It's deciding whether to accept that some things are meant to happen, even when you have the power to stop them." Elena made the right choice. The timeline is stable now. She won't need to live my life of endless intervention and isolation. But if she ever doubts her decision, I want her to know that every life saved through wisdom is worth more than every tragedy prevented through power. Elena smiled, understanding finally that her future self hadn't been trying to trap her in the bunker. She had been showing her that there was always a choice, and that the right choice was often the hardest one to make. The mysterious voice in her scope fell silent. The future was unwritten once again. 5 years later. October 14, 2022. Elena Vasquez stood in the Temporal Research Division's monitoring station deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, watching data streams from timeline sensors positioned around the globe. At 34, she had become the lead analyst for temporal anomaly detection, but more importantly, she had become the guardian of technology that could reshape reality itself. The monitoring station looked nothing like the cramped bunker where her journey had begun. Clean, well-lit, and staffed by a team of specialists who understood both the power and the responsibility they carried. Martinez worked at a nearby console, tracking temporal fluctuations in the Pacific Theater. Kim monitored communication intercepts from parallel timelines. Morrison analyzed the structural integrity of reality anchors that kept their timeline stable. Captain Webb, now Colonel Webb, approached Elena's station with a report that made her stomach tighten with familiar concern. "Elena, we're detecting a temporal anomaly in eastern Syria. The location is approximately 15 kilometers from the coordinates of your original bunker discovery." Elena looked at the data scrolling across her screens. The readings were similar to what she had experienced 5 years ago. Signs of communication across temporal boundaries, timeline bleed through, reality distortion. But there was something different about this anomaly. "Colonel, the signature pattern is inverted from what we normally see. Instead of future timeline attempting to communicate with the past, this appears to be past timeline reaching forward." Colonel Webb frowned. "That shouldn't be possible. Temporal communication requires advanced technology that didn't exist in earlier periods." Elena studied the data more carefully, comparing it to archived readings from her original discovery. "Unless the technology has always existed and we've been looking at it from the wrong perspective." She pulled up historical records, searching for unexplained phenomena in the region dating back decades. What she found made her realize that the bunker she had discovered in 2017 wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the middle. "Colonel, I need authorization to investigate this anomaly in person. I think we've been missing something fundamental about the nature of temporal technology." Colonel Webb considered her request. In the 5 years since forming Temporal Research Division, they had established strict protocols for anomaly investigation. Field teams, full equipment, multiple safety redundancies. But Elena's unique experience with temporal phenomena made her insights invaluable. "Approved, but you're taking the full team. Martinez, Kim, Morrison, the whole unit that was with you during the original discovery." 12 hours later, Elena found herself back in the Syrian desert, but this time as part of a sophisticated research expedition rather than a desperate reconnaissance mission. The Temporal Research Division had developed portable equipment for studying timeline anomalies, including shielding technology that protected investigators from paradox effects. As they approached the coordinates where the anomaly had been detected, Elena felt the familiar sensation of temporal displacement. But instead of hearing voices from the future, she was seeing images from the past. Through her modernized scope, Still bearing the faint scratches from that night 5 years ago, Elena watched ghostly figures moving across the desert landscape. But these weren't insurgents or future soldiers. They were archaeologists, working at these exact coordinates in 1962. "Martinez," Elena called out, "are you detecting the temporal bleed-through?" Martinez checked his equipment. "Confirmed. We're seeing temporal echo from approximately 60 years ago. Someone was here doing excavation work." Elena adjusted her scope's temporal filter, a technology developed by TRD based on principles learned from the original bunker. The ghostly figures became clearer, and she could see that they weren't just excavating artifacts. They were burying something. "Kim, I need deep historical record search. 1962, this location, any archaeological expedition or military operation." Kim's voice came through the comm system. "Elena, I'm finding classified records of a NATO archaeological survey in 1962. Project designation, temporal anchor. They were investigating reports of anomalous electromagnetic phenomena in this region." Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. What did they find? According to the files, they discovered evidence of technology that predated known civilization. The expedition leader recommended sealing the site and classifying all findings as potentially dangerous to temporal stability. Elena looked through her scope again, watching the 1962 team carefully placing objects into a concrete chamber before sealing it beneath the desert floor. One of the objects they were burying looked familiar. It was the exact type of monitoring equipment she had found in the bunker 5 years later. "Morrison," Elena said, "I need ground-penetrating radar sweep of this exact location. I think the bunker we discovered wasn't built in the 1960s. It was discovered then, and the NATO team buried something here that would eventually become the technology we found." Morrison's equipment revealed the presence of another chamber, smaller than the bunker they had previously explored, but containing similar temporal signatures. As they carefully excavated the site, Elena began to understand the true nature of what they were dealing with. The temporal technology hadn't been created by human military research in the 1960s. It had been created by human military research in the 2020s, then sent back in time to be discovered in the 1960s, which led to the research that would eventually create it in the 2020s. A perfect temporal loop. Elena had broken one paradox by choosing not to use the technology to prevent the attack on Forward Operating Base Phoenix. But in doing so, she had stabilized a larger loop that ensured the technology would always exist, would always be discovered, and would always require Guardians to prevent its misuse. As they opened the smaller chamber, Elena found a message waiting for her. Not written by her future self this time, but by the expedition leader from 1962. Dr. Sarah Elena Vasquez, her own grandmother, working under her maiden name before marriage. The message was simple: "For my granddaughter, who will someday understand that time is not a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean where all points are equally real. Guard this technology well. The universe has been waiting for you to be ready to receive it." Elena smiled, understanding finally that her journey with temporal phenomena hadn't begun with voices in her scope 5 years ago. It had begun before she was born, with a grandmother who had discovered something impossible and had the wisdom to know that it needed to be preserved for exactly the right person to find it. The timeline was stable. The Guardians were in place. And somewhere in the vast ocean of time, all possibilities existed simultaneously, waiting for those with wisdom to choose which futures were worth preserving. Elena Vasquez had found her purpose. She would ensure that the power to reshape reality would never fall into the hands of those who lacked the wisdom to leave some things unchanged. December 24, 2025. Elena Vasquez stood in her office at Temporal Research Division headquarters, looking out at snow-covered mountains while reviewing the year-end report on temporal stability. 8 years had passed since she first heard voices through her rifle scope, and the universe had settled into a rhythm that she was only beginning to understand. The Temporal Research Division had grown from a small team of specialists to a global organization with monitoring stations on every continent. They had prevented 17 timeline collapses, investigated 43 temporal anomalies, and most importantly, had successfully deterred 6 attempts by various governments to weaponize temporal technology. Elena's personal office contained mementos from her journey, her original rifle scope in a place of honor on the desk, photographs of her team from their early missions, and a small device that looked like a simple compass but actually monitored the stability of local timeline integrity. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Martinez entered, carrying a cup of coffee and a report that made Elena smile. "Merry Christmas, Elena. I have good news and strange news." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. "Good news first. Temporal stability index is at an all-time high. No major paradox events detected anywhere in the global network. The timeline is more stable than it's been since we started monitoring." Elena nodded approvingly. "And the strange news?" Martinez grinned. "We received a message through the temporal communication array. It's addressed to you personally, and it's from 2017. Elena set down her coffee, feeling the familiar mixture of anticipation and concern that came with any temporal communication. 2017? From who? According to the transmission signature, it's from Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, dated October 14, 2017. The night before you discovered the bunker. Elena stared at him. In 8 years of temporal research, she had never received a message from her own past. The timeline had been stable since her original choice not to use the bunker's technology to prevent the attack. What could her past self possibly need to communicate? Martinez handed her a transcript of the message. Elena read it with growing amazement. To Dr. Elena Vasquez, Director, Temporal Research Division, 2025. From Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, Forward Operating Base Phoenix, October 14, 2017. I don't know if this will work, but the voice in my scope told me that if I concentrated hard enough on a specific future moment, I might be able to send a message forward instead of just receiving them. I wanted you to know that I understand now. The voices, the visions, the impossible choices, they're all leading somewhere important. I can see glimpses of the person I'm going to become, the responsibility I'm going to carry, the lives I'm going to help save by having the wisdom to know when not to intervene. I'm scared about tomorrow. About the bunker, about the choices I'll have to make, about leaving behind the simple life of a soldier for something much more complex. But I'm also excited because I can see that every choice I make is leading toward becoming someone who can protect the timeline itself. Tell Martinez, Kim, Morrison, and Captain Webb that they made the right choice to follow you into temporal research. Tell them that the young Marine they're about to meet is going to need their support to become the person the universe needs her to be. And Elena? Tell her that her 8-year-old self was right when she used to dream about becoming someone who could protect the whole world. She just never imagined it would mean protecting all possible worlds. Stay strong. Guard the timeline. And remember that every choice you don't make is as important as every choice you do. Your past self, Elena. P.S. Check the coordinates 34.5783 north, 40.9847 east on December 25, 2025. Trust me. Elena looked up at Martinez, who was watching her expression with concern. Elena, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Elena smiled, feeling a sense of completion that had eluded her for 8 years. Not a ghost, Martinez. A promise kept. She looked at the temporal compass on her desk, watching its needle point steadily toward stable. Tomorrow, Christmas Day, she would check the coordinates her past self had provided. But tonight, she wanted to enjoy the knowledge that the timeline was secure, her team was safe, and somewhere in the vast ocean of time, a young Marine was making the choices that would lead to this moment. Elena had learned that the greatest power wasn't the ability to change the past or control the future. It was the wisdom to know when the present was exactly as it should be. Outside her window, snow continued to fall, each flake following its own unique path through the air before settling into the pattern that was always meant to be. The timeline was stable. The watch would continue. And Elena Vasquez had finally found peace with her place in the infinite complexity of time itself. The end. If this story moved you, subscribe to Hidden Legends for more tales of courage, sacrifice, and the extraordinary people who protect us from threats we never see. These stories matter, and so do the heroes who live them.